Hello, I'm Joy Lawrence, and welcome to my Charlotte Perkins Gilman biography PowerPoint presentation. The sources that I used for this presentation: the National Women's History Museum, Encyclopedia Britannica, Ohio History Central, the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study from Harvard University, this memoir Gilman wrote called The Living of Charlotte Perkins Gilman, and this Transactions of the Medical Society of the State of New York, volume 1886. We're going to have a little info from The Rest Cure from Dr. Weir Mitchell with that source. Charlotte Perkins Gilman was born in 1860 and died in 1935. She was born to Mary Ann Finch Perkins and Frederick Beecher Perkins. They had two children together, and Mary Ann also had some miscarriages. When she had her last miscarriage, the doctor told her that she ran the risk of dying herself if she got pregnant again. And Frederick Beecher Perkins said that was the reason why he abandoned the family. Although, to me, that seems a little bit weak. But he did end up abandoning the family, and Mary Ann moved her and her children in with the Beechers. Let me go back here to help survive. And so Charlotte Perkins Gilman was influenced by her grandfather and a lot of her aunts. Now, back to her father. Even though he was extremely educated and well-read, he was seen as the black sheep of the family. And so that's why I find it interesting to take a look at this quote from Charlotte Perkins Gilman talking about her father. She says, "My father took to books as a duck to water. He read them, he wrote them, he edited them, he criticized them, he became a librarian and classified them. Before he married, he knew 9 languages and continued to learn others afterward." So from our perspective, from an outsider's perspective looking in, Frederick Perkins is very impressive, but it's interesting to his family. He was not quite as good, not quite as educated, not quite as driven. So Lyman Beecher, he did have a post as the president of Lane Theological Seminary, which he resigned because he had a lot of progressive ideas that the people there did not agree with. And one of those was that idea of equality of women. And so he and his daughter, Catherine Beecher, went around the country opening up schools for women that were the equivalent schools that they had for men at that time, instead of the schools for women that they had, which were how to cook and clean and take care of the household, which is the kind of school Catherine Beecher went to and was disappointed. So she and her father, Lyman, went around the country opening up schools for women that taught the same things as the schools for men. Harriet Beecher Stowe was another influence on Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Again, these are her aunts. And this is Harriet Beecher Stowe and her brother, Clay. Harriet Beecher Stowe's passion was to speak out against the evils of slavery, and she wrote a book called Uncle Tom's Cabin, or Life Among the Lowly. Isabella Beecher was a women's suffragist in the United States. She and her husband, who was a prominent lawyer, he also fought for women's rights. So I like to point that out because there's a stereotype that men during this time period were all out to get women and keep them down. But that was not true. There were a lot of men who were on board with the women's suffrage movement. One of the things that Gilman insisted on when she was growing up was payment for her household chores, because she wanted to feel like she was self-sufficient. So she would require that she be paid for the chores that she did around the house, and then in return, she would pay for her room and board. She went to the Rhode Island School of Design, and the way that she financed her education was by doing advertisements for soap companies. While she was in college, she met her future husband, Charles Walter Stetson, in 1884. They did marry, obviously, and had one child together, Catherine. This is a picture of Charlotte Perkins Gilman and her daughter, Catherine. While Gilman was pregnant, she noticed a depression setting in, and another thing that she discovered was that she had a hard time processing information and retaining it. It became laborious for her to read and retain information. And of course, we know now what was happening to her was postpartum depression. It started while she was pregnant, and then when she gave birth to Catherine, it really hit her full force. The way that postpartum depression was treated during that time was through a popular form of rehabilitation called the rest cure. And the idea was that the women were tired and overexerting themselves, and they needed to rest. Dr. Weir Mitchell was the man who came up with this theory of the rest cure. And if you've read the story already, this name should be familiar to you. If you have not read the story yet, look out for this name while you're reading. So Gilman did go and consulted with Dr. Weir Mitchell, and this is the specific advice that he gave to Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Live as domestic a life as possible. Have your child with you all the time. Lie down an hour after each meal. Have but 2 hours intellectual life a day, and never touch a pen, brush, or pencil as long as you live. The main theory behind the rest cure was that the reason women were entering into this depression was that they were ignoring or avoiding their true role as wife and mother. And if women would just stick with being wives and mothers and fulfilling those roles, then women would be happy. But anytime women detract from that and take up other hobbies like painting or writing, then that enters them into a depression because they are not fulfilling their natural role. Right. This is an excerpt from his rest cure. I'm not going to read all of it to you, but I do want to point out a couple of things. He has here, in carrying out my general plan of treatment, it is my habit to ask the patient to remain in bed from 6 weeks to 2 months. Now, I know that a lot of times when we are stressed and overextended, the idea of bed rest sounds kind of awesome, but you want to think about how long would it be awesome? For me, it stops being awesome as soon as I have to go to the bathroom. I'm not using a bedpan. No, thank you. But the people in his cure are. I arrange to have the bowels and water passed while lying down, and of course that's gross, but don't worry, the patient is lifted onto a lounge at bedtime and sponged, and then lifted back again into the newly made bed. So the idea here is that the women are almost treated as infants. They're not allowed to do anything, no sewing, no writing, no reading, because they want the brain to be 100% blank. Just stare, do nothing, just rest. And then when you do feel that energy coming back, use it only to take care of the house, to fulfill your role as a wife, and to be a mother. Charlotte Perkins Gilman tried this rest cure, and she wrote in her diary, I came perilously close to losing my mind. In fact, that is why she names Dr. Weir Mitchell in her story. And she sent him a copy of her story because she wanted him to see how devastatingly detrimental this was on the mental health of women. She never heard back from him. However, she did have a friend who knew him, and that friend found out that Dr. Weir Mitchell did read this story, and he did actually change his practice as a result. This picture right here, I found it interesting. It's a picture from a play, a stage performance of the yellow wallpaper, where you have the women coming out of the wallpaper at the end. I do realize that I just told you a little bit about the end, but I did try to make it vague so that you don't know exactly what's happening. In 1888, Gilman moved to Pasadena. Now, prior to that, she just took a trip to Pasadena to visit some friends, but while she was there, she felt her depression lifting. And it was then that she realized that what was really causing her depression, the main root of it, was her role as wife and mother. So she decided to permanently move to Pasadena and ask Charles for a divorce. Charles ended up marrying Grace Ellery Channing, who was Charlotte Perkins Gilman's best friend. And this made Gilman so happy because she knew that Catherine was going to be loved because Grace loved Catherine, and she knew that Charles was going to be loved because Grace loved Charles. So she did not feel jealousy over this. She was happy with this union because she knew that the family she loved was going to continue to be loved. Catherine lived with Stetson and Channing, and she also lived with Gilman. It was kind of like the shared custody that we would see today. Although Gilman was consistently critical of herself for not raising Catherine always, not having Catherine with her all the time. She was conflicted with that duality of she wanted to be a wife and mother, but she also wanted to fulfill what she felt was her destiny and go towards some kind of cause and fight for that cause. So she did gravitate towards the women's rights movement, women's suffrage. This is a picture of her at a women's rights rally in San Francisco, and this is a quote of hers talking about this movement. The first duty of a human being is to assume the right functional relationship to society. More briefly, to find your real job and do it. So she believed that everybody can give back to society. Now, it wasn't that she felt women should not be wives and mothers. If that is fulfilling, fabulous, do that. But the main tenet behind feminism is the idea that women should be able to do whatever it is that they want to do. You want to be a stay-at-home wife and mother? Awesome. That's fulfilling. Great. Go do that. You want to go be a medical doctor? Great. Go do that. The main point behind feminism is that nothing should be off limits, that women should have rights and opportunities. She did remarry George Houghton Gilman on June 11th, 1900. The two of them did not have any children together, but they were companions and they were great friends and enjoyed each other's company. She co-founded the Women's Peace Party in 1915 with Jane Addams, who was also a women's rights activist. In 1935, her husband died, and she was relieved that he died before she did because she had just been given a breast cancer diagnosis. Now, during this time period, breast cancer, there was no cure. There was no treatment. It was, you have breast cancer, you are going to die a long, painful death. So she didn't want her husband to have to watch that, and she also knew that he would not be able to do well without her. She died August 17th, 1935, and the way that she died was she committed suicide. And it wasn't that she was depressed and wanted it all to be over. It was that she was living with this death sentence, and she didn't want to have that painful death. And so this is a quote from her suicide note. When all usefulness is over, when one is assured of an unavoidable and imminent death, it is the simplest of human rights to choose a quick and easy death in place of a slow and horrible one. The way that she committed suicide was she soaked a rag in chloroform and then suffocated herself. So when you are reading the yellow wallpaper, I want you to think about what I've talked about. One of the things that you will have to do is the feminist criticism. And I am also going to have you take a look at her language use in that story. So you'll want to be thinking about how, like I said earlier, how is the woman in the stories, how is her reality different than it would be if she were male? So how is it unique to her being a woman? And you might also want to take a look at that Dr. Ware Mitchell and the rest cure. I hope I've given you some good information for understanding the yellow wallpaper. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.